Outsourcing is an ever-present specter in an animation industry that simply does not have enough people working to support the insane levels of output that have become the norm. But for the second time this season, Dungeon Meshi shows that it doesn't have to be a bad word.
Dumbass.
Insulted me in the common language.
Because episode 18 is another one where Studio Trigger relied heavily on outsourcing to another studio, this time Studio Kai, who also contributed a fair amount of in-between animation to the other outsourced episode, number 6. And this one starts off by playing it safe, only to catch you off guard when it slaps you in the face with a big ol' wet slab of pure animation grandiloquence. So let's break it down and compare it a bit to the source material to see what creative choices have been made. This one was directed by Takumi Narita, adapts chapters 39 and 40, and also like episode 6, splits up the animation director pie between several different names. This entire rudimentary dialogue section has been slightly cut down for time, removing things like Laios complaining that Fallen ripped his shirt and he doesn't have another change of clothes, and this bit where he says that he doesn't like the 6th level because it's so hot. That second one, of course, also gets mentioned when they find out a few seconds later that it is not, in fact, hot, but if only one of these lines is going to be included, I would have preferred the first one to stay instead. The expectation subversion that comes from hearing that it's supposed to be hot first, then immediately being shown the exact opposite is just way more interesting than seeing the reality and then being told the expectation after the fact. The only other thing I'm really missing here is this panel where Marcel rambles on about her favorite topic, the history of ancient forbidden magic, and the words themselves expand beyond the confines of the speech bubbles. Just having her continue to talk and fade into the background under Laios' next line could have conveyed this pretty well. Whose hand is that? This is neat how the audio mixer uses stereo panning to make it sound like each duplicate line from the characters is coming from a slightly different location. Much like these multiple speech bubbles in this panel. Laios immediately starts talking to the wrong Marcel and Chilchuk. Marcel's hairstyle is wrong and Chilchuk has weirdly chubby cheeks. And strangely, the first bit of really fluid animation in the episode is this cut of Leviathan Laios simply turning his head back and forth. This is 30 frames of animation animated fully on ones, so 24 frames per second. And if you take the second half of the motion, reverse it, and overlay the two on top of each other, you can see that these frames aren't even reused on the way back. These are very similar but separate movements with a slight upward arc on the way back. Some of the frames are reused the second time he turns his head, but even then, not all of them. For reference, based on the sheer number of frames, this single head turn would have taken approximately the same amount of time between the key animator, second key animator, and in-betweeners as this entire almost 30-second sequence that I'm showing on the screen right now, barring the use of any automation tools that I'm not aware of course. And once again, like that cut from the last episode, the shape consistency in the rotating armor is bonkers. This is such a wild production decision to allow so much energy to be put into this tiny character acting moment, and it's super jarring right after the very simple scenes that led up to it. This ain't Laios. Laios almost always moves at 8 frames per second, not 24, and it's thanks to smart scheduling and resource management from series director Yoshihiro Miyajima and his producers that they're able to make such wacky decisions like this, and play with the very format of animation for what amounts to a little background gag. Storyboards for this episode are done by Akira Amemiya, the Gridman director whose work I pointed out during the Fallen Kaiju battle last episode, and he makes some fun little decisions like this one where he takes this panel and frames the characters through Laios' hand, separating the duplicates from the originals between his fingers. Side note, I just love these chapters. It's such a fun little puzzle to look at the details and figure out which ones are the fakes and whose imagination they came from. Like how this Chilchuk's little hair floppies on the top of his head aren't quite right. They have actual volume to them instead of just being 3 individual lines. And they've brought back the joke from episode 1, zooming in egregiously on this asset which is clearly not high enough resolution to handle this level of scrutiny. I love this. I haven't talked about the actual cooking animation in a while because, well, there's been some more pressing matters, but there are some great bits in here. This water boiling animation is a 4-frame loop animated animated on 3s, and it's made up of these big cartoony bubbles, which are more simplified than usual, and I'm totally open to the possibility that I'm reading too much into this one, but there's an argument to be made here that it looks like this because this isn't actual food, it's just an illusion. This 10-frame water pouring cut looks almost as smooth as that earlier one, even though it's only 12 frames per second, but it's propped up by the subtle motion of the distortion of the pot behind it, which is a wave warp effect applied digitally and composited underneath and moves in a full 24 FPS, and makes it feel like there's still some subtle motion in the water, even on the alternating frames where the shape itself doesn't actually change. There is one thing about this cut that bugs me a little, and that's that there's already an outline between these two sections of meat before he's actually cut into it. Couldn't we have at least made this part of the outline the same color as the rest of the flesh so it blends together a little better? That's made up for, though, by the attention to detail in the way that the cockatrice meat moves with the sawing action of Sexy Senshi's blade. As he begins to slice into it, the top part here moves along with the blade because of friction, and because the skin is still attached at the bottom, it bunches up, causing this wave motion. But as the blade cuts through it and eventually touches the cutting board, that friction reduces and the meat stays more stationary the further through it he cuts. In the manga, it's pointed out in this panel that no, rice is actually not Toshiro's favorite food. And after the heartbreaking conflict with him last episode, Laios proves that he actually can notice things about people if he really puts his mind to it. But more importantly, that his dog sense is unmatched. Remember when Laios and Marcel were talking about how Fallen had complimented both of them to each other, and Marcel thought to herself that she had said Laios had a great dog impression, and for some reason didn't think that he would find that flattering, so didn't say it out loud? Well, I didn't mention at the time, but that comes back in a big way. This episode has been pretty economical so far, only splurging for extra frames for certain select moments, but at this point it takes you by surprise and suddenly kicks it into high gear to match Laios' energy when he finally gets to put his best skill set to use and go into dog mode. This is a great interpretation of this panel. I especially like the smears in his hands and the way the rotational motion of his head leads the rest of his body. Dog mode is serious business. You gotta warm up like an athlete. Fun fact, in my original Dungeon Meshi video before the show came out, I used this panel to show Laios' dead serious determination to rescue his sister. Little did you fools know that what this panel is actually showing is his dead serious dedication to his craft. He's got that dog in him. That's what people mean by that, right? And inside me there are two wolves, one that thinks it would have been funnier to hear a human barking like a dog, and one that knows Laios' dog impression would really be that good. This is where the anime starts making departures from the manga to hype the hell out of this sequence and show it a bit more from Laios' internal perspective. And nowhere is that shift more evident than this insane cut with a fully animated background, 3 different camera angles, 4 moving animals, and a man. Check out how the ground is all smeared out as the camera dollies backwards, then becomes visible when we rotate around the dogs before smearing out again as that translates into quick sideways motion. I might be crazy, but I feel like I can see some mecha influence in the composition of this sequence from Mr. Mecha Akira Amemiya. Like, this anime original cut kinda looks like a mech transformation sequence on acid, and this straight up looks like it could have been one of his cuts from Gurren Lagann or Gridman. Even this, also original, is reminiscent in a way of that exceedingly melodramatic style, with the smooth animation of the outlines between light and shadow that hint at wind rippling across the monster's fur by someone. I really wish they had chosen at least one of these keyframes to publish. Brings back the natural atmosphere that could be missing if they had gone too hard into that mecha influence. The music cutting out here and the simplicity of these 5 frames adds to the juxtaposition between the energy everyone else is bringing to the scene and Marcel's calm, simple explosion magic. And let's all just take a moment to appreciate Laios' scream when he gets turned into a Beyblade by the explosion. If I were to give one complaint about this sequence, it would be that while the influence from that melodramatic mecha style does a terrific job of portraying the scene from Laios' perspective, where this is the most epic thing that's ever happened, it misses out a little bit on the outside perspective, which grounds the scene and shows it simultaneously for the absurdity that it is. But at the end of the day, Laios got so deep into character that he didn't have any plan after the bark, snarl, and lunge portion of the procedure, and we can only admire his dedication dedication to what is ultimately his life's calling. When going to preschool, I would apparently sometimes assume the character of Gus the dog for extended periods of time, as one does, and refuse to speak or communicate with the other kids at all because I was a dog and could only make dog sounds. But I can only applaud Laios' lifelong determination to the craft. And at this point, I have to warn you to fasten your seatbelt because from here onward, it's going to be permanent Asebi hours on the internet. This episode was very similar to the other heavily outsourced episode, 6, in that it adapts the manga economically, allowing the comedy of the source material to speak for itself before suddenly going fucking batshit out of nowhere in the second half with strong stylistic choices from the creatives adapting it. We're fully in the meat of the story now, where it just keeps taking turn after turn, and I'm really looking forward to next week when we take a turn towards the surreal and the grotesque. So if you want to catch the next one of these videos, consider subscribing. I'd like to thank my supporters on Patreon who give me the strength to go on: Scrubbin, Katie L, Siege Weasel, Retrohime, Serial Isle, Leia Pico, Nutaf, Patrick Davison, Lisette MT, June, Mr. YOLO McSwag, and Grav G, as well as all the other names you're seeing on the screen right now. Thank you for watching.